So, you ready for me to start? Okay. We're in the community of Boneyville, Kentucky. Boney Hays is who this town is named for. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte Hays. In 1864, Boney Hays, and with as many family members as he could get, ran off to join the Union Army at Camp Nelson. And understand, Kentucky had not seceded from the Union, so the Emancipation Proclamation had no effect in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The only way in 1864 a man could become free was to run off and join the Union Army. They were promised their freedom if they fought for the Union, and their owners were actually promised reparations for their slaves if they allowed them to join. And therefore, you'll see when you look in the service records of most of the African American soldiers from Kentucky, 90% of the time, it's going to tell who the owner of the slave was, and also gave them credit for the draft that was, toward the draft. It would say credited toward district, whatever congressional district they were in, to do that. But Boney Hays left here. This is the back of his master's property. And one of the things you'll notice if you come from north to south is we are in the fringes of knobs. Just the northern part of this is bluegrass, and you can see how the land, the topography begins to change. And so this was not as choice a ground as the rest of it. But Boney Hays went to Camp Nelson, and I interviewed his great-granddaughter several years ago. You have to keep in mind, this is a man who had been enslaved. He'd never seen anything like a new uniform, and said he was so overcome with pride when he got that crisp blue uniform, and they were going through camp at Camp Nelson. He saw his aunt, and he just couldn't restrain himself. He turned to his aunt and declared, "Oh, Auntie, ain't we ski-daddling pretty?" And that's how proud he was. He served, as you can see on the sign here, Boney Hays served in Company C of the 12th Regiment of the U.S. Colored Heavy Artillery. He was mustered in at Camp Nelson. And he served honorably. There were a lot of local African Americans that went away to Camp Nelson. He served honorably during the war and came back. And I had one of his descendants ask me, how did my grandpa managed to get the money to buy land? And so when I compared the numbers, one of the very fascinating things was it's almost impossible to say it was a coincidence. The amount of money that Boney Hays received as a bonus for joining the Union Army nearly equaled what he paid for property in 1867 from his former owner. In 1867, he bought from his former owner 7.5 acres of land. That's basically starts here and goes on this side of the road back. And a few years later, he bought another 7.5 acres and founded this community called Boneyville. Him, along with Alfred Simpson, who acquired actually a lot more land, 225 acres of land, basically from here all the way to the community of Blue Lick. And Boney Hays died, as you can see on the sign. He died in 1907, and this kind of a remarkable story. This is a man who was born into slavery, could not read and write, but managed to have one of the most meticulous estates. His estate papers at the Lincoln County Courthouse are absolutely amazing. He wanted to make sure that his descendants were taken care of, and so he tracked off the 15 acres that he had purchased into 3 5-acre tracts, and all with the exception of a tiny portion are still still belong to his descendants today. Their homes are all toward the back here, and so he tracked that off. He built a community. They had a school here. They have 2 churches, the Boneyville Baptist Church and the Bethel Boneyville AME Church, African American Episcopal Church, which is just up the road here on the left. And Boney Hays, the first thing that most of the former slaves did was to buy land. And about the next thing they did was to establish schools. and so he gave land for school here in Boneyville. And he also did not want to forget the sacrifice of his fellow soldiers. And so Boney Hays was commander of what was referred to as the GAR. GAR stands for the Grand Army of the Republic. It was the equivalent of the American Legion for today for Union veterans. And Boney Hays was commander of what was called the Rhodes Lackey. Rhodes Lackey was another soldier who was buried at the Barrows Cemetery, which is just north of Stanford Walmart, and they named their post in honor of Rhodes Lackey. And every year, the Civil War veterans from this community, led by Boney Hays and a man by the name of George Gentry, who is the only African-American lawyer that I know that's ever practiced in Stanford. They were sort of the leaders of it. And then there was a Methodist preacher by the name of Larkin Stewart. And so they would load up on Decoration Day, it was called then, a Memorial Day in May. They would load up in the wagons, and the little girls would have flowers, and they would drive their wagons from here to the Greenwood Cemetery, which is the western section, the African-American section of the Buffalo Springs Cemetery. And they would go there and have dinner on the grounds and speechifying and a little preaching and prayer, and the girls would go about and decorate the graves of the veterans that are buried there. And so that Rhodes Lackey post was very, very active in honoring them. So he built a wonderful community here. They are still very community-minded, as evidence of this. This was the result of this historic highway marker that was dedicated, I want to say, in 2008. I was here for it, and I've slept a little bit since then. Was the collaboration, actually one of Boney Hays' descendants was one of the chief architects of this happening, a man by the name of Walter Simpson. And they came together, and we had a couple, 300 people here. This whole parking lot in 2008 was filled with local residents and several descendants. In fact, at one point, they went around the audience and had people tell their relationship to Boney Hays, and there were several dozens of his descendants here. But this was a result of the community coming together and raising money for this marker to be erected so that he might be remembered in his sacrifice. I think we failed to appreciate the bravery that it took for these African American soldiers, because if they were caught in uniform, lots of times you can read about, study about the episode at Fort Pillow, and they were given, sometimes they were not given any quarter. They weren't allowed to surrender. They were just simply killed if they were caught in a blue uniform by the opposing army. And so these men left everything they'd ever known to risk everything that they ever had for a future. So he's a remarkably courageous and ingenious man.